The courtroom was tense. The air was thick, suffocating almost. The small, cramped room echoed with the rustling of papers and the shuffle of feet as everyone awaited the final moment, the moment the judge would deliver his decision. The gallery was quiet, almost too quiet. The only sound was the tapping of the judge's gavel, as though he was preparing for something monumental. Jayden and Jamal Carter stood at the center, their faces expressionless but their hearts hammering in their chests. The twins, 18 years old, had never been in trouble with the law before. But today, their lives hung in the balance. A crime they didn't commit. A judge who seemed determined to see them guilty. The truth, buried somewhere beneath the lies and deceit, seemed further out of reach with every passing second. Jayden glanced at his brother. They had been through everything together. The death of their mother, the countless moves from one foster home to the next, the constant struggle to stay out of trouble. They were survivors, both in heart and spirit. But now, in the cold, clinical environment of the courtroom, they were about to lose everything. Jamal's jaw tightened. His fingers gripped the edge of the witness stand so hard his knuckles turned white. He was trying to remain calm. He had to. For Jayden. For himself. But his mind was a storm of questions. How had they ended up here? How had everything gone so wrong so fast? The prosecution had made their case. The twins were accused of a robbery that turned violent. The evidence? A blurry security camera footage that showed two masked figures. No clear face, no distinct features. It was a gamble, really, one they had hoped would not work. But it did. The jury had deliberated for hours. The tension had grown unbearable, like a string pulled too tight. And now, it had come down to this final moment. The judge's decision. I find the defendants guilty. The judge's voice was cold, detached. On all charges. It felt like the floor had fallen out from under them. The room spun. The words hung in the air, almost mocking them. Guilty. Not a word they ever expected to hear. The weight of it was too much to process. Too much to comprehend. They couldn't move. They couldn't speak. The prosecutor's smug expression told them everything they needed to know. They had lost. Jayden felt his brother's hand tighten on his arm. He looked over to Jamal, and for the first time in his life, he saw fear in his twin's eyes. Jamal was never afraid. But now, it was as though the world itself was pressing down on him. The judge continued, but Jayden's mind wasn't on the words anymore. It wasn't on the verdict, the prosecutor, or the gallery full of strangers. He could only hear the pounding of his own heart in his ears. Guilty. The judge's voice faded as Jayden's eyes locked on the clock on the wall, ticking down the seconds, each one louder than the last. He felt his chest tighten with each beat. He was suffocating. There had to be a way out. There had to be something they could do. But the gavel came down again, and all hope seemed lost. Jamal, though, was different. Jamal always had a plan. Jayden could see it in the way his brother's eyes narrowed, the way his fingers flexed, like he was pulling himself back together. He had an idea. He always had an idea. We're not done yet, Jamal said under his breath, so low that only Jayden could hear. Jayden looked at him, confused. Not done yet? What could they possibly do? The judge had spoken. The jury had rendered their decision. How could they fight this? Jamal's lips moved again. Call Dad. He'll fix this. It took Jayden a moment to process what Jamal was saying. Dad. Their father, the U.S. Attorney General. The man they hadn't seen in years. The man who had walked out of their lives when they were just kids, leaving them to face the world alone. The man who had become one of the most powerful figures in the country. But that man was not someone they could rely on. Not anymore. Not after everything that had happened. Jayden hesitated. He won't help us, Jamal. You know he won't. But Jamal was already pulling out his phone, his fingers flying over the screen. We have no choice. He's the only one who can stop this. Jayden felt a cold shiver run through him. He had never expected to call their father. Never thought he would have to. There were too many memories of pain and abandonment tied to that name. Too many unanswered questions. But here, now, with their freedom hanging by a thread, there was no other choice. Jamal pressed the phone to his ear, the tension radiating off of him like a force field. Jayden watched as his brother's face remained calm, his eyes focused, waiting for the other end to pick up. It took 2 rings. Then, a voice. Jamal? Jayden? What's going on? It was him. Their father. The voice that had once given them comfort now felt foreign, cold, as if the years had robbed it of warmth. But Jamal didn't hesitate. Dad, we need you. We're in trouble. They're about to send us to prison for something we didn't do. You have to help us. There was a pause on the other end, and Jayden could feel his heart hammering faster. Could their father help them? Would he even care? I'm listening, the voice on the other end said, but this time it sounded different. There was no distance, no coldness in his words. Just a sense of urgency. Jamal quickly explained everything, the trial, the lies, the false evidence. Every word felt like it could be their last chance. I'll be there, their father finally said. Don't say anything else. I'll make sure this is handled. And with that, the line went dead. Jayden looked at Jamal, still in shock. Their father was coming. The U.S. Attorney General. Coming to their rescue. But what could he do? What could anyone do? The system was built to swallow up people like them. It didn't matter who their father was. As they were escorted out of the courtroom, the weight of the moment hit them both. They weren't free. Not yet. The fight was just beginning. The wheels of justice moved slowly, and sometimes, it felt like they moved in the wrong direction. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As they walked down the sterile hallways of the courthouse, a thought lingered in Jayden's mind. What if their father couldn't do anything? What if this was the end of the line for them? But as they approached the exit, Jamal squeezed his arm, pulling him from his thoughts. His brother's grip was firm, steady, unshaken by the storm they were caught in. Don't worry, Jay. This is just the beginning. We're going to make it out. We always do. And for the first time since the trial started, Jayden believed him. The cold wind outside the courthouse hit Jayden and Jamal like a slap in the face as they stepped into the empty parking lot. The gray sky hung low, pressing down on them, reflecting the weight they felt inside. Neither of them spoke as they walked to their old beat-up car, the one that had been with them since high school, one of the few things that still felt familiar, still felt like home. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the quiet, empty lot, but Jayden couldn't escape the noise in his head. What next? He kept asking himself. What can Dad really do? He turned to look at Jamal. His twin's jaw was set tight, eyes focused forward, the same determined expression he'd worn through their entire ordeal. Jamal had always been the one with the answers. The one who knew what to do when everything seemed lost. But even Jamal couldn't have prepared them for this. The court's verdict had been swift and brutal, and the injustice of it still gnawed at Jayden's insides. Jamal opened the car door and slid in behind the wheel without a word. Jayden followed suit, sitting in the passenger seat, his hands restless on his lap. The engine sputtered to life, and they drove in silence through the dimly lit streets of the city. The courthouse was behind them, but the trial wasn't over. The real battle was just beginning. Jamal, Jayden started, his voice barely above a whisper. You think Dad can really do something? I mean, it's not like he's gonna walk in and just fix this, right? Jamal didn't immediately answer. Instead, he turned the steering wheel, guiding the car through the streets with practiced ease. His eyes were focused, but there was something in the way his lips pressed together that told Jayden he was thinking hard about something. "I don't know," Jamal finally said, his voice steady but quiet. "But we have to try. What else can we do?" Jayden sighed, staring out of the window at the passing streetlights. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what was coming. The moment their father, U.S. Attorney General Marcus Carter, was called into this mess, everything would change. He knew that. But did he want it to? It was hard to reconcile the man Marcus Carter had become with the father who had abandoned them years ago. Jayden had spent most of his life angry, wondering why their father had never come back for them, why he had chosen his career over his own son's. But now, the man they had thought was unreachable was their only hope. And that realization was a hard pill to swallow. The car turned onto a side street, and Jamal slowed down. He pulled into a small parking lot behind a modest, nondescript office building. Jayden didn't need to ask why they had stopped. He recognized the building. It was one of the many places their father worked out of. It was one of the countless places where Marcus Carter disappeared into the world of politics, legal battles, and power. "Let's go," Jamal said, already unbuckling his seatbelt. Jayden followed, though his heart pounded in his chest. Was this really the right thing to do? They were walking into the lion's den. And if their father turned them away, well, then what? They stepped out into the cold once again, and Jamal led the way toward the back entrance. The security guard at the door barely gave them a glance before he let them through. Jamal had been here before, probably more times than Jayden could count. Inside, the building was sterile, almost intimidating with its sleek, modern design. The walls were lined with dark wood paneling, and the faint scent of leather filled the air. They walked past several offices, each door closed, some with lights on, some with the doors slightly ajar. The hum of activity around them felt like a distant murmur, something far removed from their reality. Jamal's eyes darted around the hallway until he spotted the door he was looking for, Marcus Carter's office. The door was shut, and the nameplate read, U.S. Attorney General Marcus Carter, in bold, polished lettering. Jamal's hand hovered over the doorknob, but before he could open it, a voice from behind them stopped him. "You're early." Jayden spun around to find a tall, suited man standing a few feet away, arms crossed. The man had the air of someone who was used to being in charge, someone who demanded respect. He was older, probably in his 50s, with graying hair at the temples and sharp, calculating eyes. "I thought we agreed on 4 o'clock, the man continued, his tone measured but with a touch of annoyance. Jamal's face softened with recognition. "My apologies, sir. We didn't mean to." "It's fine," the man interrupted, a slight smile curving his lips. "I'm just surprised you're here so soon. The Attorney General will see you now." The man nodded toward the door, and Jamal turned the handle, pushing the door open. Inside, the room was imposing, but not in the way the rest of the building was. There were no sharp edges here, no cold, calculating air. Instead, the space felt lived in, as though Marcus Carter had tried to make it feel more like home. The dark wood desk was stacked with papers and a few family photos, but what caught Jayden's eye were the walls, full of framed diplomas, pictures of Marcus with world leaders, and a few old family photos that made his stomach twist. Their father was sitting behind the desk, his back straight, his eyes focused on a document in front of him. He looked up as they entered, his face unreadable. "Jamal." "Jayden," he said, his voice a smooth baritone. "I didn't expect to see you today." Jamal moved forward without hesitation, his eyes locked on their father. "We need your help." Marcus Carter's expression didn't change. "I know. I heard about the trial. I'm sorry, but you know how the system works." "No, Dad," Jamal's voice was tight with frustration. "You don't understand. They've framed us for something we didn't do. The evidence is fake. We need you to fix it. Marcus' eyes flickered for a moment, just a brief flash of something, anger? Regret, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands in front of him. Jamal, I told you before, I can't just. We need you to make it stop. Jaden blurted out before he could stop himself. His chest was tight, his throat raw. They've got us trapped, and you're the only one who can do anything. Marcus sighed heavily, rubbing his forehead as if the weight of the world was resting on his shoulders. I can't just go in and make everything disappear, he muttered. You have to understand that. Jamal stepped forward, his eyes blazing with intensity. Then what can you do? You're the U.S. Attorney General, Dad. Don't you have power? Don't you have connections? The word stung, cutting deeper than Jaden had anticipated. But Jamal wasn't done. We've got nothing left. No one else is going to help us. We're your sons. Do you care or not? The silence in the room was suffocating. Neither Jaden nor Jamal could look at their father. The years of abandonment, the bitter taste of their broken relationship, hung thick in the air. Finally, Marcus Carter exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping. He looked older in that moment, worn down by the weight of his choices, his career, his distance from the very family he had sworn to protect. I'll make a few calls, he said quietly. But I'm not promising anything. Jamal's face softened, a flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. That's all we need, Dad. Just a chance. Marcus stood up slowly, his hand reaching for the phone on his desk. I'll call in a few favors. But don't get your hopes up too high. The system doesn't work the way it's supposed to, and it's a hell of a lot harder to fight when you're on the inside. Jaden and Jamal exchanged a look, the smallest flicker of hope stirring within them. Just, make it work, Jaden said softly. Marcus nodded, but his face was a mask of uncertainty. The real battle was just beginning. The phone call from their father, U.S. Attorney General Marcus Carter, came 3 hours later. Jaden and Jamal had spent the time waiting in a small, dimly lit diner just off the main highway, a place that felt far removed from the high-stakes world their father inhabited. The air in the booth was thick with the smell of fried food, and the quiet hum of the old jukebox played in the background, a reminder that, in some places, life moved slowly. But not here. Not for them. Not after what had happened in that courtroom. Jaden stared out the window, watching the light fade as dusk settled over the city. The weight of the trial, the judge's verdict, still pressed down on him. He could still hear the echo of the gavel slamming down, guilty. It had been too much, too fast. Everything had changed in an instant. Beside him, Jamal kept his gaze fixed on the table, his fingers tapping in an erratic rhythm. He didn't speak, and neither did Jaden. Both were too lost in their own thoughts, too consumed with the uncertainty of what would happen next. The phone call broke the silence. Jamal's eyes snapped to his phone as it buzzed on the table. Marcus Carter's name lit up the screen. Dad, Jamal said, picking it up quickly, his voice a mix of anticipation and worry. What's going on? Jamal, his father's voice was low, but there was a tone of urgency beneath it. I've got some information. You both need to come to my office. Right now. Jamal's heart skipped a beat. He glanced at Jaden, who raised an eyebrow, his worry mirrored in his brother's eyes. What happened? Jamal pressed, his grip tightening on the phone. Just get here, Marcus snapped. I'll explain when you arrive. The line went dead. Jamal tossed the phone back onto the table, his face a mixture of frustration and fear. Let's go. Jaden stood up without saying a word, his stomach churning with uncertainty. This was it. The moment they had been waiting for, the moment they would either get the chance to clear their names, or be dragged deeper into a world of corruption and betrayal. Either way, they were headed straight into the storm. The drive to Marcus Carter's office felt longer this time. Jayden couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the pieces of this puzzle weren't fitting together the way they should. His mind raced, replaying every detail of the trial, the lies they'd been accused of, and the mysterious circumstances that had led them to be framed. There had to be more to this than just a random robbery. Someone had planned this. Someone with power. And whoever that person was, they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. The car pulled into the same nondescript parking lot behind the office building, and they rushed inside without hesitation. The guard at the entrance didn't even ask their names this time. He just waved them through. The building felt even colder than it had before, the sterile hallways a stark contrast to the confusion in their minds. Marcus Carter's office door was slightly ajar, and they both hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the desk lamp illuminating a set of papers scattered in front of Marcus, who was sitting at his desk, his hands folded in front of him. Without looking up, Marcus spoke. "Close the door." Jamal shut the door behind them, the sound echoing in the empty room. "Sit down," Marcus said, finally meeting their eyes. There was no warmth in his gaze, only cold calculation, as if he had already made a decision about them, and they weren't going to like it. Jayden felt a lump form in his throat. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. But he didn't say anything. He waited, hoping his father would explain. Marcus leaned forward, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "I've done some digging," he began, his voice steady but tense. "And I found something that changes everything." Jamal's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean? What did you find?" Marcus paused, looking at them both with a mixture of regret and resignation. "You were right. You were framed. But it wasn't just random. This was planned. And it goes much deeper than I thought." Jayden exchanged a glance with Jamal, both of them feeling the weight of his words settle over them like a heavy fog. "Who did this?" Jamal asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus let out a deep breath, his eyes flickering with a sense of unease. "It's not just one person. It's a group. And they've been targeting people like you for months now. I've been getting whispers of a shadow operation, a network that uses the legal system to eliminate threats to their power." Jayden's mind spun. A shadow operation? What was he talking about? Who were these people? And how did they even know about them? "You're telling me that this wasn't just a coincidence?" Jayden asked, his voice shaking with disbelief. "Someone planned this? Framed us? But why? What do they want from us?" Marcus hesitated. "I don't know everything yet, but I've got a lead. Someone on the inside of the system is working with them. They're the ones who planted the false evidence in your case." Jamal clenched his fists. "Who? Tell us who." Marcus stood up abruptly, walking over to the window and staring out at the city below. "It's not that simple, Jamal. This goes beyond just you. Beyond me. There are people in high places who don't want the truth to get out. People who will do anything to keep their secrets buried." Jayden felt a chill creep up his spine. It sounded like something out of a spy thriller, not real life. But if it was real, it meant they were in danger. Real danger. "Who can we trust?" Jayden asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus turned back to them, his expression hardening. "Right now, no one. You're on your own. I'm doing what I can to gather information, but you need to be careful. If these people know that I'm looking into this, they'll come after me, too. Then we need to stop them," Jamal said, his voice filled with determination. "Whatever it takes." Marcus shook his head. "It's not that easy. They have connections I don't even fully understand. I'm not sure how deep this goes, but we can't just attack them head-on. Not yet. Jamal's fists clenched again. So, what? We wait? Marcus paused, his eyes softening for a moment. No. You keep moving. Stay out of sight. Lay low. I'll contact you when I know more. Just don't do anything reckless. The last thing you need is to draw attention to yourselves. Jaden nodded slowly, though his mind was still spinning. How much danger were they really in? Do you have any idea who's behind this? Jamal asked, his voice sharp. Marcus hesitated. I have a few names, but I can't confirm anything just yet. I need more time. Jamal's eyes burned with anger, but he didn't say anything. He was starting to understand what his father meant. They were in over their heads. But that didn't mean they would stop fighting. We'll be careful, Jamal said quietly. Marcus nodded. Good. I'll call you as soon as I know anything. The tension in the room was palpable as father and sons exchanged a final, lingering look. Neither Jaden nor Jamal knew what the next step would be. They were facing an enemy they didn't understand, one that was hiding in the shadows. But they would have to find a way to expose them. They had no choice. As they left the office, the weight of the world seemed to press down even harder on their shoulders. The path ahead was uncertain, full of danger and deception. But one thing was clear, the fight was just beginning. The hours after their meeting with Marcus Carter felt like a lifetime to Jaden and Jamal. The weight of their father's words lingered, like a thick fog that refused to dissipate. Every step they took felt heavy, and the city around them seemed colder, darker, more distant. The world outside their small circle of family and justice had shifted into something unrecognizable, a realm of secrets, shadowy figures, and deceit. As they sat in their car, parked just a block away from Marcus's office building, neither brother spoke. Their minds were racing, but the silence between them was suffocating. Finally, Jaden broke it. What now? He asked, his voice hoarse, as if the weight of everything was pressing down on his chest. Jamal stared out the windshield, his eyes scanning the street ahead. We keep moving forward. We don't stop. His tone was steady, though there was a trace of doubt in his voice. Dad said we need to stay low. We need to make sure they don't know we're onto them. Jaden exhaled sharply, trying to ignore the bitter taste that had settled in his mouth. But what if they know already? What if we're already too deep in this? I don't know, Jamal admitted. But we're not backing down now. We can't. We've got to figure out who's behind this and what they want from us. Jaden clenched his fists in his lap. Who are these people? And why us? It was a question that had been eating at him since the trial, since the moment he realized their lives had been turned upside down by forces they didn't understand. It didn't make sense. How had they ended up here? What had they done to deserve being framed for something they didn't even commit? I don't have all the answers, Jamal said, his voice lower now, as if speaking the words aloud made them more real. But I think Dad's onto something. Whoever is behind this, they don't just want to ruin our lives. They want to control something bigger. Jaden's head snapped up. What do you mean? Jamal paused, looking out the window at the passing cars. I don't know yet, but think about it. This wasn't just a random crime. The evidence was planted too perfectly. They set us up. The court case went too smoothly. They made sure we didn't have a way out. And now, they've gone silent. They're waiting. Jaden shifted uncomfortably in his seat. It didn't sit well with him. It's like they're watching us. That's exactly what they're doing. Jamal's voice was sharp, and for the first time, Jaden noticed how his twin's hands were clenched tightly around the steering wheel. Jamal was struggling too, but he was hiding it better. But we can't play into their hands. Not yet. A long silence stretched between them. It was an uncomfortable stillness, filled with unspoken thoughts, and the gnawing sense that they were in too deep to back out now. Jayden glanced at the dashboard clock. It was already past midnight, but neither of them had the energy to sleep. They had come too far to stop. Jamal had always been the one to keep pushing, to keep moving forward. And Jayden couldn't let his brother go through this alone. Not when everything they had ever known was slipping through their fingers. "Where do we start?" Jayden asked. Jamal exhaled slowly, turning the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and the car pulled into the empty street. "I've got an idea. We need to talk to someone who's been on the inside." Jayden frowned. "Who?" "You remember Roger?" Jamal asked, glancing at him briefly before focusing back on the road. "Roger Williams. He used to work for the Attorney General's office before he was let go. He might know something about this network. He's always been into the kind of things Dad doesn't like." Jayden's heart skipped a beat. "Roger? Are you sure about him?" "Look," Jamal said, his voice rising slightly. "Roger's not the kind of guy you trust with everything. But he knows things. If anyone can help us make sense of this, it's him." They had to do something. The feeling that they were being watched, that the walls were closing in on them, became almost suffocating. They had to act before it was too late. The streets of the city had grown quieter. The hum of the nightlife fading as they made their way deeper into the heart of the urban jungle. They drove past neon-lit storefronts and fast food joints, each turn leading them further away from the comfort of what they knew, pushing them toward the unknown. Roger Williams was a name Jayden hadn't thought about in years. He had been a part of their life when they were younger, a friend of their father's, but also someone who had a certain reputation. He had a knack for getting into trouble. The kind of trouble that made Marcus Carter uneasy, even if Roger was still a part of his inner circle. But Roger had been let go from the Attorney General's office after a scandal involving some questionable financial dealings. Nobody ever talked about it, but it had left a sour taste in the air. People whispered that Roger had known too much, and that's why they had shut him out. He was dangerous. Too dangerous to be trusted. Still, if there was anyone who might know how deep the corruption ran, it was Roger. And as much as Jayden hated to admit it, they needed him now. Jamal pulled into an alley behind a rundown bar. The neon sign outside flickered erratically, casting an eerie glow over the otherwise deserted street. This was Roger's place. It wasn't much, just a small, hole-in-the-wall joint where shady characters came and went. A place where information passed through the cracks, and secrets were sold for the right price. "Stay close," Jamal said as he pulled the keys from the ignition. "And keep your head down. We don't know who might be watching." Jayden nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure what to expect when they walked inside. Would Roger even help them? Or was he just another pawn in a much larger game? They approached the door, the sound of muffled music spilling into the night air. Jamal knocked 3 times before pushing the door open, revealing a dimly lit interior. The smell of cheap whiskey and stale smoke hit Jayden's nostrils immediately, and he fought the urge to gag. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. A few scattered patrons sat at the bar, nursing their drinks, while others were hunched over in booths, speaking in low tones. The bartender didn't look up when they entered. He was busy polishing a glass, lost in his own world. "Roger?" Jamal called out, his voice cutting through the hum of conversation. A figure in the far corner of the room stirred. A man in his 40s, wearing a weathered leather jacket and a scruffy beard, looked up. His eyes narrowed, and he seemed to take a moment to recognize them. "What do you want?" Roger asked, his voice gravelly, like he hadn't used it in days. Jamal stepped forward, lowering his voice. "We need information. About a network. About the people who set us up." Roger didn't say anything at first. He just stared at them, as if weighing his options. Finally, he stood up, motioning for them to follow him. "Back room," he muttered, leading them through a narrow hallway and into a small, dimly lit room at the back. It reeked of old newspapers and dust, the walls covered with papers and maps, all pinned haphazardly with thumbtacks. Roger motioned for them to sit. "All right," he said, finally turning to face them. "You want to know about the people pulling the strings? I can give you something, but it's not gonna be pretty." Jamal leaned forward, his eyes intense. "We need to know who's behind this. They've framed us. They've been covering their tracks, but we're not backing down." Roger's eyes flickered with something, recognition, maybe. "You're in over your heads," he muttered. "But I'll tell you this much, the people you're looking for? They're not just some random criminals. This is bigger than anything you could have imagined." Jaden felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. This was it. The truth was about to come out. Roger's office was far more cramped than it had appeared from the outside. The air in the small room was stale, filled with the scent of old papers and the faint musk of cheap cigars. The walls were littered with maps, photographs, and notes pinned in every direction, creating a chaotic but strangely organized display of information. Everything had a place, even if it wasn't immediately clear where that place was. Jaden and Jamal stood at the doorway for a moment, their eyes scanning the cluttered space. Roger had sat down at a cluttered desk, his hands fumbling with an old cigar while he stared at them, waiting for them to speak. Jamal moved first, stepping into the room. "You said you could help us," he said, his voice low but firm. "Who's behind this? Who's trying to ruin our lives?" Roger took a long drag from his cigar, the embers glowing in the dim light. He didn't answer right away, instead glancing at the maps on the wall as if gathering his thoughts. After what felt like an eternity, he exhaled and spoke. "You boys have no idea what you've walked into," he said, his voice rough, but there was an undeniable edge to it. "The people you're dealing with? They're not your average criminals. These are high-level operatives, the kind who control everything from the shadows." Jaden's stomach dropped. He had suspected as much. The feeling that they were up against something far bigger than they could handle had been gnawing at him ever since that fateful trial. But hearing it out loud, from someone who had seen the inner workings of corruption, made it feel even more real. Roger leaned forward, flicking the cigar ash into an old tin can. "This isn't just about you two. It's about the whole system. They've been planting people in key positions for years, making sure the right decisions are made, the right cases are ignored. And now, they've targeted you. They've used your trial as a test. They're making a statement." Jamal stepped forward, his fists clenched. "But why us? What's the connection?" Roger's eyes flickered with a mix of pity and caution. "That's the part that's complicated. They've been watching you for a long time. It's not just about the robbery. It's about your father. Marcus Carter, the Attorney General. He's in their way. You two? You're just pawns in a bigger game. They knew Marcus would move heaven and earth to protect you, so they set you up. They framed you to create pressure on him." Jaden felt a surge of anger and frustration. They were being used, nothing more than pieces in someone else's game. He could see it now, the way their lives had been twisted into this web of lies and manipulation. But why? Why had they targeted Marcus, and in turn, them? "Who are they?" Jamal demanded. "Who's pulling the strings?" Roger hesitated. He glanced at the door behind them, as if making sure no one was listening, then leaned in closer. "They call themselves the Circle. A group of powerful people with vast influence in both the public and private sectors. Some of the biggest names in business, politics, and law enforcement. They don't just want power, they want control over everything. Every decision. Every policy. Every court case. And if they can't control something, they destroy it." Jaden felt a chill run down his spine. "The Circle," he repeated, trying to wrap his mind around the name. It sounded like something out of a conspiracy theorist's wildest nightmare. But hearing Roger, someone who had worked within the system, speak about it so matter-of-factly, made it all too real. "Where do we go from here?" Jamal asked, his voice tight with urgency. "How do we stop them?" Roger took another slow drag from his cigar, his eyes narrowing. "You can't. Not by yourselves. You need help, someone on the inside. Someone who can connect the dots. Someone who can expose the circle." Jaden's heart raced. "And you think you can find them?" Roger's lips twitched, a dark smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I don't just think I can find them, I already have. But they're slippery. They've covered their tracks well. Whoever's behind this is smart. They've managed to keep their identities hidden, but I know enough to get you started." Jamal leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Then tell us. What do we need to do?" Roger pulled open a drawer in his desk and retrieved a small folder, handing it to Jamal. The folder was thin but heavy with significance. Jamal took it, his fingers grazing the edge, before flipping it open. Inside were several photos and documents, each one detailing different individuals. "These are the people who are part of the circle," Roger said, his voice low. "I've gathered what little I could on them, but trust me, it's not much. These people operate in the shadows. You won't find them listed in any public records." Jaden looked over Jamal's shoulder at the documents. There were several faces he didn't recognize, but one stood out among the rest. A man in a tailored suit, standing beside a smiling politician, the two of them shaking hands in front of a gleaming government building. "This guy," Jaden muttered, pointing at the photo. "Who is he?" "That's Marcus Hunt," Roger said. "One of the most influential men in the country. He's the one pulling the strings behind most of the political decisions. And the one who most likely set your trial in motion. If you want to find out who's truly behind your frame-up, you need to start with him." Jaden's eyes narrowed. The name Marcus Hunt rang a bell, but he couldn't place it. Was he just another name in the political world, or was there something more sinister at play? Either way, they were headed straight for the heart of this conspiracy. "How do we get to him?" Jamal asked. Roger paused, then gave a slight, knowing smile. "That's the tricky part. Hunt has layers of security around him. He's not someone you can just walk up to. But there's one way to get close. There's a gala next week, big fundraiser, high-profile event. All the elites will be there. That's your chance." Jaden raised an eyebrow. "A gala? How does that help us?" Roger leaned back in his chair, looking them both over with an almost mischievous glint in his eyes. "You two are good-looking, smart, and you've already proven you can handle yourself in a pinch. Get into that gala. Look for Hunt. Find a way to talk to him. Get information, anything that'll lead us closer to the circle." Jamal exchanged a glance with Jaden. It was insane. A gala? A formal event with hundreds of powerful people? It felt like stepping into a lion's den. But what choice did they have? This was the only lead they had. "You're sure about this?" Jamal asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Roger shrugged. "It's your best shot. But be careful. This isn't just some game. The stakes are higher than you think." The weight of his words hung in the air. Jaden knew they didn't have much time. The circle was closing in, and if they didn't act fast, they'd be swallowed by it. They left Roger's place in silence, the reality of what they were about to do setting in. The gala. It was madness. But if they could get close to Marcus Hunt, maybe they could find the answers they were looking for. Maybe they could expose the circle and bring down everything that had ruined their lives. The drive back to their apartment felt like a blur. Jaden couldn't stop thinking about the gala, about the danger they would be walking into. But Jamal didn't seem fazed. He was already planning their next move, strategizing their way into the event. When they finally arrived at their apartment, the first thing Jamal did was pull up the event details. The gala was only 5 days away. They had no time to waste. "We'll need new clothes," Jamal said, already pulling up online stores. "We need to blend in. No one can know who we really are." Jaden nodded, his stomach tightening with anticipation. "Let's get ready. We don't have a choice." As they prepared for the gala, one thing became clear to both of them: the calm before the storm was over. They were about to dive headfirst into the very heart of the circle's web. And no matter what, they couldn't back out now. The night of the gala arrived with a sense of foreboding hanging over them like a heavy storm cloud. Jaden and Jamal had spent the last few days preparing, meticulously planning their approach. Every detail had been accounted for, from their attire to their false identities. They had become actors in a high-stakes play where the audience was not only the elites they would be rubbing elbows with but the unseen forces of the circle that hovered over every decision, every action. They stood in front of the grand venue, the glittering ballroom of a luxurious hotel that had been transformed into an opulent display of wealth and influence. The scent of expensive perfume and freshly polished marble filled the air as they took in the sight of limousines pulling up one after another, delivering guests who had no idea of the storm that was brewing beneath the surface. Jaden adjusted his cufflinks, glancing over at Jamal, who looked equally as sharp in his tailored suit. They were the picture of sophistication, perfectly fitting in with the crowd that had gathered for the evening's gala. As they approached the entrance, they showed their invitations, carefully fabricated, but convincing. The security personnel didn't question them. They were part of the glittering elite now, at least for tonight. But as they stepped inside, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were entering a lion's den. A place where the truth was hidden beneath layers of lies, and where the game was played with no rules, only outcomes that mattered. The ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting shimmering light over the crowd of well-dressed men and women engaged in lively conversation. The rich aroma of wine and gourmet food permeated the air, creating an atmosphere of exclusivity and power. Jaden's pulse quickened. Somewhere in this room was Marcus Hunt, the man they had come to confront. They made their way through the crowd, scanning the faces around them. Jaden's mind raced. They had no clear plan other than to get close to Hunt and see if they could gather any useful information. But every step they took felt like a risk, the walls of the room closing in on them. "What do we do now?" Jamal asked in a low voice, his eyes darting around the room, trying to spot any sign of Hunt or anyone who could lead them to him. Jaden scanned the room, keeping his voice just as low. "We need to find someone who knows him. Someone in his inner circle." The longer they stayed, the more Jaden could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. It was one thing to plan this mission from the safety of their apartment, but standing here, in the heart of the circle's territory, made everything feel far too real. Suddenly, a voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. It was smooth, confident, and unmistakably familiar. Well, if it isn't the Carter twins. "You clean up nicely, I must say." Jaden's heart skipped a beat. He turned around to face the voice, and there he was, Marcus Hunt. He stood tall, a sharp, intimidating figure in a dark suit, his cold eyes glinting with amusement. His presence was commanding, as though the very air in the room had shifted with his arrival. "Mr. Hunt," Jamal said, his voice controlled but wary. He extended his hand, but Hunt didn't take it. Instead, he gave them a once-over, his expression unreadable. "Not exactly the welcome I'd give to two young men who've just been acquitted of a crime they didn't commit," Hunt said, his tone laced with sarcasm. "But I suppose it's true what they say, family does have a way of getting things done." Jaden kept his cool, even as his mind raced. This was it. The moment they had worked toward. But something about Hunt's smile felt off. It was too calculated, too cold. As if he already knew their game. "We're just here to enjoy the evening," Jaden said smoothly, forcing himself to smile. "No hard feelings, right?" Hunt's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Enjoy the evening. But you'd be wise to keep your distance. This is my world. And I have eyes everywhere." The words hung in the air like a warning, a subtle but clear threat. Jaden's spine stiffened, but he refused to show any sign of fear. He had to stay calm. The stakes were too high to falter now. "Actually," Jamal said, breaking the tension, "we were hoping to speak with you. It's about some unfinished business." Hunt raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Unfinished business? You're either very bold or very naive. Either way, I'm listening." "Your involvement in the case of our wrongful conviction," Jaden said, his voice steady but intense. "We know you're behind it. We just don't know why." Hunt's expression darkened for the briefest of moments, but it was gone almost as soon as it appeared. He took a step back. His hands clasped behind his back as he studied them. "You've been digging into things you shouldn't. That's dangerous." The tension in the room grew thicker. Jaden felt like a target, the weight of Hunt's words pressing down on him. But this was the moment they had been preparing for. There was no going back now. "We're not afraid of you, Marcus," Jamal said, his voice unwavering. "And we're not leaving until we get answers." Hunt's cold eyes flickered with something, amusement, perhaps, or maybe something darker. "You think you can take me down? You think you can unravel the circle? It's too late for that. You've already crossed the line. And now, you'll have to deal with the consequences." At that moment, Jaden knew that they were no longer in control. The game had shifted. Hunt wasn't just a man to be confronted, he was the orchestrator of a dangerous and well-connected network, one that was willing to do anything to protect its secrets. The world around them seemed to freeze. Jaden could feel the weight of his next words, the choice he had to make. He had to keep pushing, but the risk of exposure was growing by the second. The circle wasn't just a group of influential people, it was a force, a system, and now it had them in its sights. Before Jaden could respond, Hunt turned away, his voice calm and cold. "I think it's time for you two to leave."